Hey everyone, we are back for our next session, and by we, I mean with me for these videos as always is Erik. Hi Erik.
Hello.
And I managed to figure out a lot on my own since the last time we did things, but don't worry everyone, we're going to go through everything. First I'm going to show you by running the game, and then I'll show Erik how I figured out how to do it, and then that'll be a great chance for him to explain it further or tell me how I could have done something better than I did. So let's get into the game itself. And I might have to quickly adjust its volume levels now that... Let's see. It might be too loud otherwise. Yeah, I'll make it a little bit quieter. Oh, actually, it looks like it already remembered. That's nice. Okay. Let's get back into the game. Alright, so as you can see, there's this weird thing here now that's only temporary art to show off the translucency effects that you can do with Scorpion Engine and the palettes arranged properly.
So, could I ask you a question about that? I'm assuming that's all one object, so you've got a solid, you've got the solid bars, and then you've got three different tints.
Yep. I'll show you exactly how I did that.
Yep.
That is a great question. I'll just cancel out of this for now. Let me get into the folder. The other thing, one of the things I did on a simple graphical level, if you guys remember from the last video, there were those half stalactite or stalagmite, I guess. Stalagmite rocks at the bottom that were just kind of floating there. And I just got rid of that, and I shortened this copper list because in this game, the bottom of the foreground, like the actual tile map graphics, completely obscures the bottom part of the screen all the time. So this did not need to be the full height of the screen. So I shortened it and I just got rid of it and just left the copper color changes down here. So that kind of cleaned up the game. At some point we can put those stalactites back in when we have time to do them properly and have them scroll vertically as well at a different speed than the foreground graphics. And so let me get into that folder. I think I have it open. Okay, so if we look in the sprites, and then so you'll see that I do the same thing for the attack and some other effects that you're going to see soon. But where is that thing? All right, here it is. Here's its transparency. Okay.
Yep.
So when you have your palette set up in either 16 or 32 color mode, this would work the same if your palette is arranged in four value ranges. So I had to do something a little weird to make it ideal for this game since the background is pretty light. If we look at the palette image, let me go there. Here it is. So the graphics look weird because I didn't bother remapping when I changed the palette, but if you look carefully, there's every range of color. The first set of four is deceptive because the first color is black, but in all the other four color ranges, you start with the medium and then dark, and then the lightest and second lightest. So medium, dark, lightest, second lightest, medium, dark, lightest, second lightest. That's for like the reds, that's for the blues. And then we've got, let's see, the reds, and then we've got same thing for like purpley colors. And so because those are set up the same way in sets of four, so you've got one set of four values for greens, one for blues, one for reds, one for purples. Because of that, if you go into Scorpion, once you have set up your animations, and then for any given image, you could click Edit Mask Advanced, and if you do so, I won't do it, but if you do so, it'll automatically in the folder create an image where by default, if it's in 16 color mode, you're going to have four duplicates of it, for in the case of that image originally, which let me load that image up, sprites. So here is the original frame. All right, so you can see it's all solid. So by default, Scorpion Engine just makes it look like this. Let's see how it's not on a grid. But all four of them going up would look like this. So what you have to do from there is you're always going to be affecting the top two most images, which, you know, the white, and we're removing white and leaving black to basically tell it, don't draw this bit plane for these pixels. And so you could see, for example, this one has the shine here on it. So we still want it to draw that bit plane for the shine, but then for the top, only things that are completely opaque. You could see that white for this frame. Let me, let's see, I'm going to turn off alpha, 1 second. All right. So if I grab this here, you could see these pixels are white everywhere on all four because we want that opaque. And the bottom two will have pure white pixels for every pixel of actual graphics. So in this case, we're talking about this, right? But the top two are the ones we change. And then you could see we're always going to have the stuff for the opaque frames, but then the topmost represents the areas where you want to be the most translucent, which is the complete retint. It takes everything from, so in your environment graphics, if you have stuff that's made out of your brown range or your green range, for example, but you're drawing something like here, you see how there's blue here? So what that's telling the game to do is no matter which of the 4 color ranges that the background graphics are currently drawn in, it's going to force it to use the range of 4 blue colors instead of the range of whatever, 4 greens or 4 browns. So it's retinting everything. So you keep all your detail, but it's just tinting it to that new color, which again is decided by what color you've drawn in the actual image. So you could see, once I run the game again, you'll see this side tints blue, this side tints red, this side tints purple. But it gets more complicated than that because we're not just doing the full tint mode versus completely transparent versus opaque. We're also doing the other translucent tinting mode, which does, you lose half of your color detail. So it kind of breaks it into the lighter and the darker version. So what I mean by that is that's what this does. So that actually pertains to the second frame of this image, which is here. So you can see on this image we have the shine, and on these spots I know you could see, so now I'm using, if you look at the real palette arrangement, let's see, where is it? There we go. If we look at the real palette arrangement, we have to use ideally the first color from, which represents the darker shade, and then this color here, which is the third one of the range, which is the lightest color. So you can see that's what I'm doing here. So I've got the darker color from the range and then the lighter color. And so what that is doing is, if you use the darker color, it tells it to use the first two, which are the darker shades of that color, to tint. So now you're using all 4 of your colors in your range in the environment graphics, but when this bob gets split over it with the alpha mask set the right way, it is now taking the lightest, the first 2 colors in the range and kind of bumping it down to 1 color. Does that make sense? Or no, all 4, and forcing them all down to the first 2. This is complicated to explain, but basically you're losing some of the shading detail, but you're gaining another, what looks like more opaque level of transparency, and you're separating it into darker and lighter. So that's what this is for the shine. So you could see all the stuff you want, keep full detail and it seems more transparent. That's where you don't have it in both of the top things. So most, everything here, and then you just leave white where the shines are. And so you could see the shines, even the shines are not opaque up here. And so it's just that one bit plane left out that makes it the second shading mode, where you lose detail, but you gain the 2 steps of shades. So anyway, that's how that works. So it's complicated, but you get used to it. If you experiment a little, you'll see how it works. But just remember, you only want to edit the top 2 masks for the bit planes. Does that at least make some sense? Yeah. I know that's complicated.
But yeah, sorry. To be clear, the reason why it's the top 2 is because this is a 16 color palette where you've divided it up into 4.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. Come to think of it, I don't know for sure if you're in 32 color mode. I don't know if it'll still be the top 2 or it'll be...
Yeah, you. So in 32 color mode, you will have 5
bitplane images, right?
Bitplane images here. So yeah, you would need to recalculate. I guess if you had the exact same palette, right, you would probably want it so the 5th bit plane was solid. Unless you wanted to do something fancy, like instead of having 4 ranges of 4 colors, you would have 8 ranges of 4 colors.
Right. Or you could do fewer ranges of 8 colors, which usually for a 2D pixel art game, that's overkill. Very rarely do you need, typically that's very wasteful. A lot of beginner pixel artists and game artists, they make that mistake where they give themselves far too smooth ranges of each color, and therefore they have far fewer ranges to work with. And they end up doing very blurry kind of pillow shading kind of shading. But as you get more comfortable and more experienced with pixel art, you'll see you don't actually need a ton of colors in a given range. It's more how carefully you use those shades and colors, and not how many of them you have at your disposal. And usually your game will look better with more ranges of color as opposed to overly smooth ranges, but only 2 ranges or something. Although I have to say, the Bitmap brothers infamously, almost all of their games, because they simultaneously made their games for Atari ST and Amiga, they were all 16 color mode, and they all used almost the same exact palette scheme, which was just, for the most part, a big range of bluish grays and a big range of brownish reds. And the artists just got really good at making nice looking games. Like Xenon 2 Mega Blast is a good example. I think Gods was also them, I'm almost certain.
Yep.
So if you look, there's one other color index they reserve for adding a little extra color or copper for the background. But for the most part, it's just 2 giant ranges, one warm and one cool. But anyway, I don't want to digress too much into the art side of things, but let's get back into the game. So let me run the game one more time and just show all the other stuff we have going on. And again, that thing we were just talking about, it serves no purpose other than just a demonstration of the translucency effects. That's going to be replaced or completely removed by the time this is a real game or game level. But the cool thing is those other things in the game have that effect applied in more subtle ways. This actual blur, the attack blur by his sword, that has a very subtle bit of that effect in the blue shades of it. So it's so the pink and the white are opaque, and then the blue is semi-transparent, but most of the time that's hard to notice. You can see here we have a floating platform. I'll show you how I did that shortly. And if you look very carefully at the darker part of that kind of glow under it, that's got the semi-transparent effect on that darker color. You can see it when it goes over the highlighted parts of the leaves. And now we have a big enemy that shoots at us, and we can actually repel the shot back at him and destroy him, and he takes 2 hits. And when he's dead, he can act as a platform now, which is kind of fun. The thing I think I'm most proud of figuring out how to do is that now that I'm up here, you can see there's pots up there. And those pots are made out of blocks, so they're very friendly on performance. But also, the question is, how do I get up there? That broken column there can act as a platform. However, because it's broken and on an angle, when you land, let me land on it, your character is going to slide off pretty quickly. So you actually only have about a second to jump off of that and continue onward before you fall off. And then these work, you can destroy them, and then they leave little orbs that you collect. And those orbs you collect also have the translucency effect. Here's another vase on the ground, and I can break that, and you can see a little bit of the translucency effect on that, and then you can grab it. And then we've got actual patrolling enemies, and you can actually hit them. They take 2 hits, and they go flying back. And then on the second hit, after that, one of the important things for kind of enjoyment factor of the game and visual feedback, when I initially programmed it, as soon as you hit the enemy with your second attack, they blew up instantaneously, and that was less gratifying. So I figured out how to make it so they don't blow up until after they finish flying back on the second hit. So I'll show you how I did that in the code as well. And you can do a Mario butt bounce on it. I did discover a bug that should be very easy to fix, where right now the code basically says if the player overlaps with the enemy and is falling, then teleport the player up to the top of the enemy just to make sure, and then give him a Y velocity of a negative number to make him bouncing back up, and then play a special animation in the enemy to make his little reaction. So I'll show you that in a minute. But the bug is, at one point I was falling here right at the edge, and I was below. There you go. And you can see I teleport up.
Teleport up.
Exactly. So the easy fix of that is to just add another if check in the code that says if the player is falling and if the player is above the position of the enemy, or at least equal to and above. That'll get rid of that glaring teleport problem. But yeah, so that's another graphical thing. I fixed the tile set. If you remember from the previous video we made, the player was kind of partway too much into the ground because I had not carefully designed the tile set so that the top of one tile is exactly where his feet should be. So I fixed that in the tile set, so now that looks correct.
Looks really good.
Awesome. Okay, so let us quit out of the game and start looking at the actual stuff I've added. So you guys saw in the previous video that Erik had walked me through and taught me how to import the art and create animations and then actors. So I just did a bunch of the same thing for all of the different animations and objects I would need. So let's start with one of the first thing I added after that video with the previous video with Erik is the platforms. So all I did was create the 2 frames of art. I made it harder on myself because I wanted the translucent effect. So I had to click edit mask for the 2 frames and then edit those to get rid of, on those top 2 alpha mask channels, so to speak, top 2 white images, I had to get rid of the white pixels that correspond to this orange color here. And then once that was done, I just created a new animation for the platform, and then a new actor, and imported, so floating platform. And then so all we need is up and down movement in this case, because they never go side to side. So I just have it in idle. I don't know if I even need it in idle because it's never not moving, but just to be safe I put it in idle and move. And only in up and down, and it's the same animation for up or down. And then once I had that, then I could set the collision box. So you could see I set it so that the player's feet won't be completely on top. It'll be down in it a little bit. And then the important thing, you could see I gave it a CPU wave movement. And I told Scorpion that it's a platform, so the player can jump up onto it. So those are the important things. You set it as a platform, you set it to CPU wave, and then the speed up, you have to play with these settings. So I played with these settings until I got the general speed and the size of the movement wave that I wanted. And then the other important thing, I had a bug where if you kind of left the screen and came back, the position of the platform was not resetting, but it was kind of remembering where it was in the wave cycle, so that if you kept leaving and coming back, eventually the platform could be way off the top of the screen or down way too low, so it wouldn't serve the gameplay purpose that it was supposed to. And the solution that Erik told me for that was to change the recycle mode to respawn. So that way, whenever it goes off screen, it basically nullifies its previous wave state and position. So then when you scroll it back onto the screen, it's always at the initial starting point, which guarantees it's never going to get off sync, so to speak, with its vertical position, which is really important.
Shall I speak a little bit about what the concept behind recycle is?
Oh, please, by all means, yeah.
Yep. Okay. So, with because with making Amiga games, we've got very little CPU time we can play with, and so if we've got a big level that's got a lot of active objects like so enemies and projectiles and things like that, we don't want all of it taking up CPU time, running in the background. If there's an enemy on the other side of the level, we don't really care about his patrol cycle, because that's just going to be wasting the little CPU time that we have.
Right.
So what recycling is, it's a term that Scorpion uses for how do you handle an object if it's off screen. Sometimes you do want objects that are always active even if they're off screen, so maybe you've got like a two-player game and one player walks out of the screen temporarily. There are some things where you want it to basically be frozen in place, so if there's an enemy that you haven't killed and then you walk away from it, when you walk back you would expect that enemy to still be there, but we can just sort of freeze it in place so it's not using up CPU cycles while we're off on the other side of the level. We can also decide not to recycle. We can just trash the object, and sometimes we want to do that for things like projectiles. So if a projectile goes off screen, we basically treat it as something that's just gone forever. We don't. If we come back to that part of the level, we don't want to see it again. We'll just assume it's already hit a wall or something like that.
Right, or just scrolled so far away that it's irrelevant and you'll never catch up to it.
Right. So for most projectiles, you may as well just assume that when they've gone off screen, they're no longer exist and they're no longer going to affect gameplay. So you may as well just delete those ones.
Right. Yep, excellent. Yeah, I mean, and like Erik said, that's critically important, how you're making sure you're not dealing with any of the kind of logic of an object when it's off screen if you don't need to. And obviously the drawing, I assume it's not bothering blitting stuff that's off screen. Yeah, so, so that's how we did the platforms. And I think that's fully explained now. So the next thing up is this enemy, which is pretty complicated even though he doesn't move, because he's, for the sake of performance, since he's so big, I decided to make it hard on myself and make him out of blocks. So I created these, where is it? Blocks. Where is he? Okay. So I had to create a bunch. B is for big and then dead. So here's the version of him after you've killed him. And you could see, to make it probably unnecessarily optimized, I even just built the background tiles right into him so that I could set it to fast split mode. But Erik had mentioned that that's probably not saving a ton of performance. Let's see. So I just had to create a specific block for each piece of him. And there's both the living mode, here he is, and the dead mode. And then in the map editor, and of course I have it set to fast split, which is only necessary, or you don't want to do that if you don't have the background built in. Yep. But then the other important thing is some of them I also have set as a platform. So if you look up here, so that you can land on him once he's dead, and use him as a platform. And then I go into map, and you could see I edited a map, and I put the living version of him in there, and his face that actually shoots at you and gets hit, I made that an actual actor. So it's a blitter. I guess they're all technically blocks or blitted too, but they're not quite the same. So that's a normal actor. And then the actual code, there's a few code blocks I made. Before I get too far, did you have something you wanted to interject?
We could come back to it, but I did have a suggestion or an idea about the enemy bot that could simplify things a bit.
Okay, sounds
so.
Good.
If should we cover that now, or
yeah, sure, go for it.
Okay, so if you want to go back to your blocks tab.
Okay.
So I noticed you've created a whole bunch of blocks for the living version and the dead version.
Yeah.
The way I see it, the dead version is almost redundant because you could, instead of using blocks, you could draw it as tiles. So you could draw the dead version as tiles on the map, and then draw the live version over top of it.
That's a great point. Yeah. That's a great point. So instead of replacing, that would simplify it a lot. Instead, you'll see in a minute, I have
instead of replacing the blocks, you would delete the live blocks, and that would reveal the dead version underneath.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Which that does make fast split necessary, because in the case of turning on fast split, that does make the transparent color 0 opaque, which is necessary because their positions change a little bit. So it's possible bits of the dead one, if it were in the tile set, would be peeking out from behind them. So that would be the perfect crime. If you do build your tiles, if you know exactly where, like in this case, you know exactly where the enemy is going to stand in the level, and you can create custom blocks that have him in there with the background built into it, and you set it to fast split, then like Erik said, which would be really efficient, instead of swapping out all of those, you just delete them all and it reveals the dead one that's built right into the background. That's a great idea. I thought what you were going to say, which would also be really nice, but probably a lot of work on your end, I thought you were going to say it would be the ability to support blocks bigger than 16 by 16 that match tiles, like 32 by 32 or whatever. But it's certainly not necessary, and your solution in this case is fantastic. It will make future enemies and objects like this drastically easier to do, keeping that method in mind of just building it into the background tile, the dead version, and then just putting the block version of the live version over top in the map editor. So anyway, but that's how I did it. And then if you look at the actor for the face, let's see, where is it? Big face. So you could see on spawn, on collide. So there's these different situations. I'm used to calling them triggers. So if this thing happens, you do something. You trigger a code block usually. So you can see there's collisions with blocks above, below. We don't need any of that. But then we have on melee hit with player. That's another thing I had to do. If you look in the, since last time, if you look in the player, where's player? If you look at his actual attack animation, he now has a, let's see. Oh no, that's in the animations, sorry. So if we look at player attack, I think it's called player attack. Yeah. So if I pick the right frame, you'll see it's got a melee box. Where is it? Yep. Right there. So that's necessary for detecting specifically. So let's go back to actors and big face. So it says on melee hit by player. and then we're going to trigger a custom code block I made called hurt big. So let's go see what that looks like. So code, and then let's find hurt big. So you can see it's quite a lot of code specifically because I do the changing. But then again, I guess the amount of code would be the same. It would just be delete, which is a lot easier, a lot less work. To just say delete this, because I had to keep track of the names of each one and very carefully go, okay, at this coordinate, replace this one with this one. And it would have been way easier to just know the initial coordinates and say, okay, just delete it. But anyway, and obviously you're saving or potentially saving memory too, because you don't have all those extra blocks for the dead version. But anyway, yeah, so I trigger a sound effect, and to do that, just to show everyone, you just click here to add an event. I don't know. Do you have a vocabulary for that? What do you call it? Our line?
The commands.
Oh, commands. Okay, yeah. So I'm sorry, guys. I'm used to construct. So they're called events and actions. But anyway, so I just click here, and then you would choose audio, and by default it's play sound, and then you just pick any of the sounds that you've imported into the sound folder. And I might as well mention that I use Audacity for Windows, and I'm pretty sure it's free. It might be open source, and it works, I think, on Mac and Linux as well. I think there's versions for those. I'm not positive. Pretty sure. But then the important... Yep, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say that I also use Audacity for... Because when I want to use sound sourced from the internet, they're invariably either VAR files or MP3s or OGG. But with this, we can import all of them. We can import basically any format we want, and then we can export it into the 8 SVX files that are Amiga friendly, so we can use them in Scorpion Engine.
Right. So here's an example. This one was still saved out as an F, and that's a good thing to know, at least in the Audacity I have. It's a little convoluted. It's not obvious how to do it. But let's say you've loaded in a wave, for example. Once you're done editing your sound, one of the big things, make sure there is no blank space at the beginning of your sound sample, because that'll create an unavoidable and unfixable delay. Not something you could fix with code in your sound effect, and obviously you want the sound effects to be synchronized with the visuals very well, so make sure you delete out. So let's say, example, this was all blank space here. You would just select it like this and then press delete. But then the important thing is, once you're done editing your sound, and you could do all kinds of great stuff, you could select specific bits and change their pitch and add echo effects and all kinds of stuff, fade in, fade out, change the speed and tempo of the whole thing. Once you're done editing, you choose export and then export audio. And then you need to make sure you've chosen other compressed files as the type, and then IFF Amiga, and then make sure signed 8-bit. Is all this correct, Eric?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, and then the other problem is it's going to save it as .iff, and you have to remember yourself it should be called 8svx, and so after you save it, you have to rename it.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's in Amiga world, IFF usually refers to an image.
Exactly.
Yeah. So now Scorpion doesn't actually support IFFs, but I thought maybe sometime in the future I might. So that's the reason why when you're saving sounds, you have to specify that it's .8svx, so that it knows that it's an audio file.
Yeah. It's not a big deal at all, and if I were making a bajillion sound effects for the game, there are free programs out there that are batch renamers, and it's super easy to set up a process that's just going to take that, what is that called? Not suffix, but the, what do you call it? The dot whatever part of it, of the file name, and replace it with, in this case, 8SVX.
The extension.
Yeah, that's it. Extension. Yep. Thank you. You can tell I'm not a programmer right there. I forgot what an extension is called, and a file name. But anyway, so that's how you create it. And obviously you want all of your sound samples to be as short as possible. So, like that's the thing I already ran into. I already had to do some optimizing because you know me, I like a real challenge. So I'm trying to get it to fit in memory, on a 1 meg and run, smoothly on, just an Amiga 500 with 1 meg total. So I had added a bunch of sound effects and a bunch of art, and the game was starting to, not run on those very low settings, 1 meg Amiga 500. So I had to start doing some optimizing. So I had to become more careful with how many sound effects I was adding and making sure each one was as short and sweet and had no blank space as possible and all of that stuff.
Have you considered changing the frequency?
I was going to ask you that off video because I looked for it and didn't see. I saw that you could change the volume.
Open up. If you open up Audacity again, I'll show you exactly where it is.
Oh, in Audacity. I thought you meant in Scorpion during playback. Yes.
No. So,
okay.
If you open up that same file in Audacity.
All right, 1 second. And it sounds like you're not just talking about for the way it sounds, but you're talking about how much file space it's going to take up in RAM?
Yeah, so that is the main reason why you'll change it. So you see down the bottom left, you've got it at 16 hertz.
Oh, nice. Okay, I was going.
So 11 hertz is usually what I standardize.
Okay.
So that's about a third. That should save you about a third.
Awesome.
But there is a trade-off between quality and file size. So, as I say, 11 is what I standardize on. I know some Amiga games, like I think I did some hacking around with Giant Sisters, and I think some of those samples went down to about 6K. I think it also like your mileage can vary depending on
the type
of kind of sound it is. Like I think if it's like a sort of a rumbling, like an earthquake, I think you can go fairly low with the hertz and still have a good sound.
That was my understanding too. High frequencies require the higher. So like a low frequency sound, like an explosion or a rumble or anything like that, can usually survive better, bringing it down to a lower rate or frequency or whatever. So that's great news. That'll really help me. But that was the thing I was going to ask is, would it be possible for the Scorpion engine audio, whatever its audio system is, to support, like I saw already, and I used it already in one case, where in under audio, you can change the volume, where is it, sound volume of the next sound that's going to play, and then switch it back. So that's useful for getting more mileage out of the same sound effects. But if frequency were possible, that would allow a huge savings, theoretically in memory, if it doesn't take a ton of code to support it, or obviously if it doesn't support performance too much.
Yeah, I'll just check my to-do list. I don't think I've... I'll make a quick note of should be able to change pitch. But yeah, that is a useful thing to have in a game engine.
Oh yeah.
It's not just sort of making one sound, like a different sound, but I believe in some games for things like footsteps or gunshots, you change the pitch just a little bit so it doesn't sound like just the same sound repeating. But you get that sort of variance that you'd expect. Yeah,
it is amazing. You can, very often in most games, you could cut down the number of distinct sound samples you need eating up your memory in half or more, because it is amazing how different the sounds can be. Like, let's say you need a bunch of different little chimey sounds for when you pick up objects or something good happens in a game, just like a little ding. you get one tiny little sound sample, and by changing the pitch and possibly also changing the volume, you could probably get the entire range of chime type sounds, ranging from, bassy and low pitch to high pitch, and like you can get an amazing range of sound with that one tiny sample by changing the frequency and the volume. And the amazing thing is in Metro Siege, some of the biggest sound samples, because they require a high frequency, and they tend to be longer, are human voice samples. And so we have like, combat grunts in Metro Siege, and, we're battling memory all the time for Metro Siege to fit all those characters and all their moves and all the logic in memory. So, the amazing thing is Kim's voice is exactly the same as Alex's voice. Not Alex the programmer, Alex Brown, Alex the character. And it's just a severe frequency change to make it sound like a woman. And it was extremely effective.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah, I was so happy that it didn't just sound like a chipmunk or like a manipulated male voice. Like, it just sounds great. It sounds like it was intended, like that was her actual voice. But yeah, like, really, I am very happy to hear that it sounds like it's possible, and that'll really help keep memory really low. Memory use.
Of course, with Metro Siege, you need to have both of those voices and memories at once, because it's a 2-player game, and so.
Oh, interesting! I didn't realize. I thought it was changing the frequency on the fly during playback. It wasn't manipulating. I could be wrong.
Sorry, no. I was suggesting, like, if you had a separate male and female voice,
right,
separate files, not separate pitch. If you had separate files, then you would need to have both of those loaded into memory at once, because it's a 2-player game.
Exactly.
So one person could be the man, one person could be the female
great
character.
point. Yeah, exactly. If you could swap characters in a game that's one character at a time, then you could just load in the particular samples that the male or female character needs, or the different voice needs. So that wouldn't be a RAM concern. It would just be a storage space concern if you were trying to fit your game on one floppy disk or something. But in this case, if Scorpion Engine can actually set on the fly the frequency, you would only need it in RAM in the one format, right? And a one frequency, and then it would be changing the frequency on the fly while it's playing it, right? Do I understand that correctly? So and I assume that's what Metro Siege is doing, which, like I said, was very effective and really helped keep down memory, so we can squeeze as much into each game level as possible. But anyway, let's get back into the game. So that's what I'm doing there. Is I trigger the sound effect. I'm using variable 1 of the actor of the face. And I'm just incrementing it. I'm adding a 1 to itself. Is that how you do an add? So I set the variable to itself, and I should show how that's done. So that's under base, and then you choose set variable, and then you can when you click here, you can start typing, which is really nice. For example, actor to whittle it down. So you could just completely type it all in if you're careful, or you can pick it. So you could say actor variable, and then if you look carefully what it is, instead of reselecting everything, you can just actually type actor variable 1 plus 1, right? So once you do that, you can see here, set actor variable 1 to itself, actor variable 1 plus 1. So that's what I did down there. Let me get rid of these lines of code that I've been adding as a demonstration for how it's done. And so we do that, and then if the actor variable that we just incremented is now greater than 1, so it starts at 0, the first time he gets hit, it'll be 1, and then the second time he gets hit, as the player plays, if he keeps hitting the enemy, it'll eventually be greater than 1. So with the second hit, it'll be 2, which is greater than 1. So now we trigger the explosion sound effect, we spawn an explosion, which is an actor, on the actor. So remember, when you say on actor, that's the thing that basically triggered this code block in the first place. And then that separates it from player. So you could say spawn explosion on player, and that would do it where the player character actor is. And then there's also projectile, I think, which is specifically something shot. And then the really important one that Erik taught me about was new. And new is the latest actor or projectile that was just created. So if in an event, so you could see I created an explosion here. If I wanted to then change the position of an explosion, which I actually do, you'll see right under it, I say move new actor, and that way it differentiates it from actor. Actor would be the face. I don't want to move the face. I want to move the explosion, so I chose move new actor to its own X. I just leave that the same, and then new Y plus 15. So wherever it was spawned, when I just spawned it in the first place at the face, I needed to tweak its position so it was in a better spot for the explosion. And so that's how I moved it to its own Y position plus 15 pixels. So that moved it down 15 pixels. Does that all make sense?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
it does.
And then, so basically, I'm using the explosion to give the player visual feedback that you've killed it, and then simultaneously, I'm changing all those blocks, which after we're done recording this video, I'll definitely take Alex's advice, get rid of all those blocks for the dead version, and just add that to the tile set and put them right in there. In the tile set, and then put the living version on top, making sure that all of his blocks are in fast split mode. Alright, so that's how that works, and after that, I do spawn a second explosion because he's so big. When I initially just spawned that one explosion, it just looked too small for such a big enemy to leave one little poofy explosion. So I create a second one, and I do that. Yield is also super useful. I did have a question about the difference between the two different versions of yield. This one is on actor timer, and the other one is on the game timer or something like that. So, but let me finish this and then we'll get to there. So basically I'm making it wait a fraction of a second before spawning the second explosion. And of course I don't want the whole game to wait and to pause. I think that is another option, is like a pause or a wait. I think it's called wait. But so what yield does is says don't pause the whole game, but make this code block wait however much time you want before it does the next thing, which is spawn the second explosion. Because if I spawn both explosions at the same exact time, it's going to look very artificial and too symmetrical. So I'm waiting a second, or not even a second, but a fraction of a second, spawning the second explosion and changing its position to be in a different spot from the initial explosion to make sure it covers the whole body of the dying enemy better. And then I destroy the face actor. So remember, actor is talking about the initial thing that triggered the code block. And then I don't even know if end condition is necessary. That's for the if. That's for the if. Okay, it is, right?
Yeah. Mm.
Okay.
So it's good. So most programming languages do require that if you have an if at the end of your code, you have like an end condition or an end if.
Right.
Scorpion doesn't specifically require it, because when it's loading the code and it gets to the end of the code block, if it sees that you haven't closed all of your if statements with the end condition, it will add those in automatically.
Very nice.
But for code tidiness,
yeah,
it's good, and it's just good practice to for every if statement you have, you close it at the end with an end condition.
Because if it's not at the very end, if you just didn't close a big if like I have at the very end, that'll completely change your code logic and cause bugs. Like if you have an if and you don't close it and then you start another if, that second if will only happen if the first if is true because you didn't close the first if. So yeah, it's a really good habit to make sure you're always ending them. But that's cool to know that if you don't
Yep.
close your final if, Scorpion will kind of tidy it up for you while it's compiling. That's very cool.
I will get you to make one tiny change
Yeah.
now, just to show off or just to discuss a certain principle. So, one problem with if statements is like you see how your content of the if statement has that indent,
Yep. Right here.
and so that's not a problem, but it could become a problem if you've got more if statements inside that and then more if statements inside that. You basically get
Super
what
indented.
Mixel calls a mountain of if statements.
Right.
But there are certain things we can do to avoid making if statements, and we can even do it here.
Right.
So if you want to drag end condition, so it's just below, it's on line 4, so it's just below the if statement.
Okay.
Then we want to, if you click on your if statement, we just want to reverse that condition. So it's saying if active var1 is greater than 1,
Yep.
we want to change that to being less than or equal to 1.
Fascinating. Less or equal.
Yep.
Yep.
Then click duplicate line, because we do need one line inside that if statement.
Okay.
So click duplicate line and change the category to base.
Base. This is going to be one of those else, isn't it?
Oh no, change it. Change that to return. So sorry, base, still base for category.
Oh,
but
okay. I'm sorry. Yep.
We return. Yep.
Okay.
Right. Return. Yep. So that one. If you click that, so that's basically saying, well, if I haven't reached the death condition, then just return. Don't run the rest of that code.
Awesome. Okay. So I get it. So because we inverted this, and because all of this only happens if it's greater than 1, because we've inverted it to now be the opposite, we simply exit out of all of this code if it's not past 1 yet. So it adds the thing, it triggers the sound, that's all great. It's definitely going to do that when you hit the enemy. But then it's going to be able to completely ignore all of this code and skip back to the game because it'll only continue with it if this is not true. So very smart way to be more efficient and basically allow the game to skip all of this.
Now, there is one other thing I wanted to suggest. Now, this particular optimization probably wouldn't be that useful within this game, but I think it would be a good principle to talk about. So let's say you've got a statue that's very similar to this one, but it has 3 health or 5 health.
Right.
You don't want to... Well, one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to make a copy of this code block and then, you end up with a dozen code blocks that are basically the same except for the condition that says, how much health they have.
Right.
One way you could solve that is you could have some if statements to say, well, you could nest some if statements to say, well, if it's the statue number 1, it only has 1 health. If it's statue number 3, it has 3 health, things like that.
Right.
But then it's still, even though you've only got 1 code block, you could still get this mountain of if statements.
Right.
So what we will do here is I'll get you to make another change to that active R1.
Okay.
So in the principle, we're going to change the meaning of active R1 from, because currently means how much damage have you taken.
Right.
We'll change the meaning of it to being how much health do you have.
How much total health, to begin with? Okay.
Yep. So the first thing we'll do is you've got it +1. If you want to change that to -1, so active R1 -1.
Okay. Let's see. Right here, -1.
Yep.
Okay.
And then you want to change that to say if active R1 is greater than 0.
Right.
So if you've got at least 1 health left, we don't want to destroy the statue.
Yeah. And then now I assume I need to go into the actor of the face and make his initial value not 0. Because he'll
Yes,
just
that's
blow
correct.
up immediately. Or the first time he's hit, anyway. So actor, and then big face, and
Yep. And
then...
then var1 is down the bottom.
Yeah.
Yep, bottom middle.
I wish I
And
could...
that
Oh,
also...
hide. There we go. Okay.
Yep. That also means that...
I'll give him 3 hit points. I wanted to do so.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, if you wanna test that...
Yeah.
And yeah, it does mean that, well, for one thing, you could, in theory, have multiple statues that have different amounts of health.
Right.
The other thing it means is that you can change the amount of health on the actor tab where it's more logical, where because it's more directly related to the actor rather than dig through the code to find where in the code you've got the health defined.
Right. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And that's really important to know that you can make a code block, and if you design your code block carefully, it can be applied to lots of different actors or enemies. So that's what Erik was saying, is like the way it is now, we could have different enemies that have the same code to basically take damage, keep track, and make an explosion and destroy them once they run out of however many hit points they start with. And because in your actor you can set its hit points, and it's just referred to as actor in the code block, whichever enemy got hit would trigger that code block, and then that word actor would be referring to that particular enemy and with that particular version of an enemy, and all of this would still work. Obviously in this particular case, the hard positions of the blocks would be an issue. You know what I mean? Like if I had multiple enemies on one level, their positions are going to be different, so I'd have to code that differently. But in general, especially if this was not a bunch of blocks and was like a normal actor, then yeah.
Well, that is something we could fix so that you could have enemies. Well, you could have this enemy anywhere in the level,
Right?
Assuming that the background tiles and all that match, so it still has match layout. But so if you click on just the example, if you click on where it says change block,
Change block, right?
Xpos and Ypos, they are actually expressions. So you've got them hard coded to 21 and 7. What you could do is something like actor X divided by 16 and then like +1.
Right.
Actor X divided by 16
so
+2.
The actor is the face that's going to get destroyed, and obviously it's in a specific place relative to all of the blocks that make the body of the enemy. So what Erik is saying is that by using math, you can basically, no matter where each enemy is, because it has a corresponding face, and the face is what's affected, using that math is going to definitely affect the appropriate blocks for that particular enemy that you just hit or destroyed. So that makes perfect sense. Yep. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure. I'm trying to help translate to other non-programmers, make sure everything is easy to understand.
Yep. No, that's that makes sense. And just to be clear, the reason why I said divide by 16 specifically, that's not just like a random magic number.
Right. It's a tile, the block width.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. Because the blocks are 16 pixels wide.
Yeah.
The Xpos and Ypos, it expects there is the map tile coordinate. So that's 21 tiles across and 7 tiles down.
Right.
If you've got a pixel coordinate, like 100 by 200, you could then just divide each of those by 16 to work out, okay, well, that's the pixel coordinate, that's where it is on the screen, so we'll convert it to where it is on the map.
Right. Very cool. Okay, so...
It also goes the other way as well. So if you know where the tile is and you want to move the actor to it, you can take the tile X or the block X and then times that by 16
Right.
to get the pixel coordinate.
Awesome. That makes perfect sense. So what is the next thing? Oh yeah, so let's talk about the little patrolling enemies that roll back and forth. The thing I'm most proud of with that is the turning animation built into them. So let's look at the actual animations first. So we have them simply, they're called roller or roller 1. So there's just an idle, which is just one of the 2 rolling frames. And then there's rolling, which is simply going back and forth between 2 frames. What did I call it? Idle walk. Okay. So you can see it's just 2 frames that go back and forth that give it some movement and make it feel like the little unicycle, the little wheel is turning there. And then just flipped for the other side. And then we also have a 1 frame hit for when they go flying back from getting hit. And then we have the turn animation, which just has some frames to... and the nice thing is it's really just 2 unique frames that are then flipped for the other side, which you would need from going the other way anyway, so it's fairly efficient. I could reduce it to just 1 frame, but it would be less smooth, and I just wanted it to be a nice smooth turn animation. And you could see... Yep, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to ask. This is, I guess, this is an art question.
Yep.
Because that has a genuine feeling 3D effect to it when it's turning.
Yep.
Is that basically just?
That's just a lot of experience and doing it freehand. But if I were doing a lot of characters for a game that had a lot of turn animations, and I did have the skill as a 3D artist, which I could have modeled this in 3D and literally rendered it out and then cleaned it up as pixel art. But in this case, since I don't plan on having a billion enemies and a lot of turning frames, I just freehanded it. I designed it initially facing the side view, and then I just scribbled out in my pixel art program the frames I need, and I just kept going back and forth from frame to frame, making sure everything kept the appropriate size and relative position, and the perspective was right. Ironically, the thing you wouldn't think was the trickiest is the fangs coming down. Getting them to not look like they're wiggling a little bit side to side in his mouth while he was on his mouth while turning was actually the trickiest part.
Interesting.
But yeah, it's because they're so thin, being off by 1 pixel left or right while he's turning relative to the perspective, it was super easy for it to look like the teeth were wiggling side to side on the mouth while it was turning. But yeah, so and all I did was make 2 frames. So there's one that's almost not turned at all, just a little 3/4, and one that's almost front facing. That way, when you flip it, it would be a waste to have one perfectly facing front. Because this gives you the smoothness you need with 2 frames that you then flip to continue the rotation. And obviously it's a really good idea to design your enemies and characters so they look exactly the same facing left or right, because otherwise you would not be able to reuse the same flipped frames, not only for walking left and right, but also for flipping, for the actual turning animation.
Yep, absolutely. I remember reading about the final boss of Street Fighter 3. They deliberately made the character asymmetrical.
Yep.
So the character looks different because his body's sides of his body are different colors.
Right.
I guess it's just to show off the hardware or to show that they can fit all of these frames of animation in memory.
Right. Exactly. All right. So let's get back to how did I then... So let's see, where's the animation turn? You'll see the important thing is I have prevent move checked on. And then with Erik's help, I was able to, let's see, or I should say with the Scorpion Engine's help, I think I figured this out actually on my own, but let's see. I'm in the wrong code block. Let's go back to the actor, and you'll see we have...
that's the face actor.
Oh, sorry, wrong. Yep. Okay, so
Right.
roller 1, and we have basic turn, so has reached the edge of a platform. So I'm triggering. So all you do for any of these things, for example, let's say on melee hit against player. I haven't done that yet. I need to make it so that these guys can hurt the player. But so you would just click that and you would pick the code block that you've created for it. And then that way when that thing happens, it triggers that code block.
Oh, sorry, just to be clear, on the melee hit against player requires a melee box?
Yes, I would have to add it. Yep.
Oh, yeah.
So that would be under...
So you want a... Sorry, you want a hurt box for the roller that's different from his normal collision box.
Exactly. So that would be... I would go under the walk animation normally, and then I would click this, and then that would give me the box, and then I can set the box appropriately, like if I wanted it to only hit the player if he's facing the player from the front or something like that. I could do something like this. But in this case, I'm not ready to do that yet. So just to get back into the actors, but you could see we're triggering, where is it? Basic turn. So if we look at that code and find basic turn, this is tricky. The reason I have this if here, and now I know I can change it to be the reverse, like you said, to skip out of it. But basically, I make sure that he's not dead yet, because it was very funny what was happening in the game. If I happened to attack the enemy, and it should have killed him, but remember I had coded it so he doesn't blow up until he's done flying back. So if he flew back enough that he was then on the edge, instead of finishing that animation and therefore blowing up, he would turn and then not blow up. So you'd have to hit him again and hit him in a way so he's not going to have to turn. So like only if he wasn't near the edge could you kill him. So it was a very funny bug. So basically I don't let him turn unless if he's dying, if he should die, I don't let him turn basically.
So so he's got to have less than 2 damage.
Exactly. But I'm going to change that, so he's going to start with a certain number of hit points in VAR 1, and we're subtracting it instead of adding all those things that you had me fix for the big face robot. I'm going to do here, so that logic's going to have to change, but otherwise you get the idea. Don't turn if you're dying or if you're about to die, but otherwise then I check which direction he's currently facing. And then I play the turn animation to turn to the facing the other direction. And then I set his speed to the appropriate speed for once he's done turning. But remember, because that animation says stop movement, this speed change does not take effect until he's done playing the animation, which is very nice. That's just an automatic thing. And then now that he's turning, I set the look dir to the other way so that the game knows he's looking in the other direction now. And then I use else because if I used another if, this would happen, and then this would now automatically be definitely true. So if he started facing this way and then I turn him, now this is going to be true. So your character, the enemy would just keep turning back and forth infinitely at the edge. So that's why I had to use instead of another if to check. You know, like that's a very common kind of beginner programmer mistake, is to create these 2 checks where if the first one is true, the changes it makes will guarantee the second if will be true. So it'll kind of nullify itself and cause kind of an infinite loop. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay. It would only happen on one direction. So if you had...
Yes, exactly.
So if you were looking left, it would happen twice, or it would flip twice. But if it was looking right, it would only happen once, because that was the second of the 2 conditions.
Exactly right.
Yep.
Right.
So there was one thing I wanted to mention is I had a very similar bug on the game I was working on last night's stream. On my Twitch stream last night. So basically, what happened was the player has a fairly long death animation. And And then at the end of the death animation, he basically like lies in the dirt for half a second before it reloads the level.
Right.
The problem was if the player could continue to get shot,
Right.
and every time the player gets shot, it would restart that animation. So he'd be lying in the dirt, he'll get shot, he would stand back up again for a second, then fall over and be dead again.
That's
I
very
solved.
funny.
So I solved that in a different way, and the main reason why I solved it in a different way is because the player doesn't have health. You have one. Well, you get
one hit
once,
and you're dead.
and then you're dead. One hit and then you're dead.
Yeah.
So what I did instead was I created a second actor, and the actor was called something like Player Dead, and then I basically turned off all the movement on it.
Right. So it's just there to do the die thing. It has no other logic, and that way you're just destroying the actual player, replacing it, and that way he can't get hit again. He has no code for that. He has no all his job is to play the death animation and then disappear.
Yes.
Yep, awesome. All right, and some things I realized we haven't quite covered yet is how I get the this guy here to not explode, not die until he finishes flying back. So if you recall, I have the hit animations. And let's see. So you can see here for the frame, so which is the second frame, I have blow up. Let's see. It should not be in the first frame. Why is it in the first frame? That's weird. Or does it not work that way? Am I confused? There we go. There we go. I don't know how that happened, but it's supposed to be on the second frame.
Second frame.
Yeah. So basically, that's how I do it. So I made a code. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I was going to ask why you have the same frame twice, but with different times, and then the explosion sequence. But it's because that the frame event runs at the start of that frame, so you have the explosion sort of 2/3 of the way through the entire animation.
Exactly. So originally it was a one frame animation, but when I realized, I want it to blow up after he plays his getting hit animation and flies back, this way I just extended it. So even though those 5 frames duration never play, it doesn't matter. Like by that point, after those 9 frames, it's the good time for him to blow up. So that's why that happens, that's why it's set up that way. But at some point, when I was tweaking this, I somehow ended up with triggering it on the first frame, which is not supposed to be the case. So there we go. So that should fix that. So that's it. So I just need to show everyone what that code block looks like. So, which was blow up. So it just checks if that variable is greater than 1, which again, I'm going to change everything. So if it's 0, and it's going to start at a number and get subtracted now when it gets hit. So just pretend this says if variable 1 is 0, or to be safe, in every time I make a game, I end up making different attacks from the player can do more or less damage at a time. So instead of saying, that's another common beginner programmer mistake, is you'll go, okay, if the hit points are 0, then destroy the enemy. But if the enemy gets hit by certain things, their hit points may end up below 0, and then their death would never trigger because it never hit exactly 0. It went from, let's say 2 to -1. So you've skipped past 0, so the enemy never dies. So this is a way to guarantee.
You would always use less than or equal to 0.
Exactly. Or less than 1 is the same thing. And so, but anyway, and then I spawn the explosion. So if he should be dead, I spawn the explosion, I destroy the actor, and I trigger the explosion sound effect. So that was nice and simple. More complex was we had the actor turn when he reaches the edge of a platform, which is automatic, if you recall. Let's see, has reached the edge. But the more tricky one is if he is up on a wall now. So basically he's going in a direction and now there's a wall in the way, how do you make them turn around then? There's not an automatic on hit a wall. Or there sort of is, but it's here. But you can't directly trigger a code block with these, right? You can only pick one of these default things.
So that may change in future. There may in future be an option where you can trigger a
code block. That would be
code block, because you may potentially want completely custom collision detection against walls.
Right.
But for now, the workaround is, as you've done, is to use expire timer.
Yeah. What would be especially nice is if you do augment it, if you could choose one of these and trigger a code block, that would be amazing. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you might want to bounce, but also do something else too, or block, but do something else as well.
Yep.
Because like when a character or the player bumps up against a wall, that's so common in games. There's so many things you might want to do. Giving someone that flexibility would be amazing. And like you said, because we have to trick it by expiring the timer, and then down here you could see on timer expired, then you can trigger your custom code block. The issue is, that's great, but what if I wanted the timer to not automatically expire? Maybe I needed the timer to do other stuff. Like in the case of the big robot with the face, I use the timer to time when he shoots. And I couldn't use something like this, an expire timer, for an enemy I also want to shoot like that, or I'd have to figure out a different way to code a timer to make him occasionally shoot. But anyway, for now, this is what I did. I set the timer to something extremely high, a bunch of 9s here. So basically it's never going to run out while you're playing the level. You'd have to leave it on for a bajillion years. So it's only getting expired basically when we force it to expire if he hits a wall, and then we could use the same code basic turn. So now if he hits a wall or if he reaches the edge of a platform, he'll turn around. All right. And then let's see, I feel like there was something else. Oh yeah, I did want to ask you actually, one of the new things I want to do, but first let me make sure. Blocks for the pots, showing how you destroy the pots.
Yep.
Let me do that first. So let me go into blocks, and you could see that the pots are just blocks, and they have transparent backgrounds, and they are not fast split, so I can put them wherever I want. And there's 2 color variants, but right now I only created the animation and its placeholder art of a red one shattering. But eventually I'll have to create an animation for a blue one shattering as well. But there's the blocks, and you can see they don't really have any special properties, except on player melee hit. So we play something called red pot in this case. And if you look at the code block for red pot, we spawn a red pot broke actor. So that's the little kind of particle effect of broken shards of a ceramic pot flying away. Let's see. And we spawn a red magic orb. That is the thing kind of waiting inside the pot that you want to break the pot to get that thing. And then you change the current block. So remember, this code block is triggered by a block being interacted with. So current block is that particular block that was hit. And we trigger the sound effect. And that's it for how you make them break. And then as you saw, we're creating a red orb in that spot. And then if you look at that actor red orb, here's an interesting thing regarding optimization. I'm guessing this might not be true, but I figured it probably takes a little more on performance when you have an object that has built-in like sine wave movement and stuff like that via the CPU. So originally I had it with a sine wave movement, but then I thought there could be quite a few on the screen with enemies and pots and stuff like that. So why don't I just reuse the same image but shift its position in the animation? So if we look at the red pot the red orb animation, it's only 2 actual images, but I created a bunch of frames that make it have a little sine wave movement to make it more lively while it's animating.
Mm.
So graphical
Yeah,
memory.
that
Yeah.
So that makes sense. The overhead of the animation is basically going to be the same, no matter how many frames you have.
Right,
But
exactly. Processor wise. It's just
mm,
obviously using a
um,
little bit more memory for the extra position data for the images.
mm.
Right.
But with the actors, if you have the movement type set to something other than none, then it's going to actually try to.
Like it uses logic. It's taking some
Yep.
level of performance off of the CPU. So yeah,
Mm.
I'm glad. Like I realized, hey, it's only 2 frames, but I can reuse those same images, shift them a bit, get the sine wave movement I want. It'll take a tiny bit of extra memory, but free up that CPU performance for moving more important things that are more relevant to the game's behaviors. So obviously the downside for this, you have to be careful. A thing only has one collision box, so you could see there what I really need to do, come to think of it, is extend the collision box so that no matter where it is in its movement cycle, when the player grabs it, it's still, you know what I mean? Like that's the thing to worry about. If you're building a movement into the animation of something, you have to compensate with a bigger collision box, and sometimes that might not be ideal. Whereas if you move it with the CPU, like a sine wave movement, obviously the collision box is going to move right along with it. But this is perfectly fine trade-off for me. I don't need the collision to be really accurate. In fact, in game design in general, it's always a really good idea to err on the side of the player when it comes to collision boxes. So when the player is attacking, give him a nice big collision box for his attack to take effect. And when he's collecting things that are good for him, make that collision really easy to happen. So, you want the greater accuracy when it's the enemies trying to hit the player, because you don't want the player to feel like, oh, that was cheap, I shouldn't have gotten hit there. But conversely, in situations like this, where he's picking up something that's good for his health or his points or whatever, it's perfectly fine to use a generous collision box. So it's very easy for him to collect the thing. But anyway, so then you could see here, I've got this as an actor called red orb, and then if it collides with the player, we play the code grab red orb. So if you look at grab red orb, we spawn a red grab, so a little nice little flash effect when you grab something. And then we destroy the actor, which is the red orb, and we trigger a nice little positive chime sound effect to audio-wise reinforce to the player that something good just happened. So I think that's actually pretty much everything I was able to add on my own. So the question is, Eric, do you have any time left to do something new? Or should we end this recording session here, which is obviously fine.
Well, I was just thinking, we haven't talked about the dust.
Oh, right. Good point. Yes, I did forget.
Yep. It is starting to get a little bit late for me, but the dust might be a good place to end it, because I think that's the last thing that you've added.
Okay, so obviously I needed to create a dust animation and then a dust actor, which the dust doesn't need a collision box. And I did make an animation for left and right for the same exact reason as we just talked about for optimizing performance. So I use the same exact art for whether or not the little poof is going to go to the left or the right. But I just repositioned the 3 frames to go in a little arc to the left or the right, so that oh, actually it says CPU, but that can be set to none.
Yeah. If your object doesn't move at all, then using none is slightly faster than using CPU. CPU, there's still a little bit of overhead, even if you've got speed as 0 in every direction, because it still checks to see, has the code updated my speed to be more than 0?
Right.
If you set to none, then it's not going to move it, even if you've manually set the speed.
Awesome. Every chance to optimize, I love. So that's fantastic. So once the actor is created, obviously we need to figure out how do we make the player. And that is something I would request if it's possible. Something that's used all the time in game logic is, has a thing landed on the ground? So if we could eventually have a trigger like this for has landed on the ground, that would be fantastic. If possible. But so anyway, let's go back to, so the actor of the player. So on timer, as you can see here, and I don't know if this is the best way to do it, but I set the timer to 0 in on timer expired player code. So now any kind of universal should always be checking for logic can be added to the player code block.
Yeah, and that is a pattern that I use myself, is for when I want really bespoke behavior that runs on every single frame for an actor, then I set the timer to expire on 0 frames and have a link to a code block.
Awesome. Awesome. So, that's exactly how I did it. Okay, so you can see here we have a variable added that is used specifically for this logic. So I guess that means it's not one of the actor variables, basically. It's not specific to a given instance of an actor. It's kind of a global thing that's specific to this code block.
At the moment, all variables are global. So if you can reference landed in a different code block.
Okay, cool.
Also, you get an error if you've got a variable could landed in this code block and a variable landed in other code blocks.
Right, okay.
Something that could possibly come in future would be local variables. So that way you would have a variable that you can only access within the code block, and also it means that you could have identical named variables in other code blocks that don't interfere.
And that way, if you are applying the same code block to multiple enemies or multiple players, you don't get that you're trying to use the same variable for different things. If they're local, the code it'll have a local one for each character that code block is applying to, right?
Yep.
Which would be obviously really handy for a lot of things. So very cool. But all right, so what is happening in the logic? We set something up I just called it landed, which is probably counterintuitive because I think this is actually when it's in the air. But my goal was to check to find out when the player has just landed. So I have if the player is on platform, which is just, let me add and show you. If you go into play
conditional.
Yes, thank you. Oh yeah, it is, because then you check expression. Thank you. So then you have all your variables, and then it would be actor is on platform, and then that's going to be either true or false. Go ahead.
Yeah, so there is it's a little bit like quantum mechanics, is there is actually 3 states for is on platform. So that's why the condition at the top, it says, instead of saying why we use is on platform equals false, rather than if is on platform is not equal to true, it's because so there are 3 states for is on platform, because we want to be able to track if they're in the air, if they're on flat ground, or if they're on a slope.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And so, if you have it set to false, it basically means that I'm not standing on any kind of platform. If it's set to true, then it means it's specifically, am I standing on flat ground?
Right. Okay. So true is flat ground.
Yep.
Probably some kind of numeric value, maybe, is for on a slope, I guess.
Yep. Hopefully, sorry, if you scroll right down to the bottom of code blocks,
okay.
Hopefully I've remembered to put in I click on the one that says VM constants. Hopefully I've remembered to put in a value for it. Maybe I haven't. So if you scroll down, there might be one. Maybe there isn't. Okay, so I need to put in a value into this VM constants that basically says that it's a special value for detecting whether they're on a slope or not.
Yep. Okay.
So the hard-coded value for whether they're on a slope is something like 1.
Mm-hmm.
And then the hard-coded value for whether they're on solid ground or flat ground, that is -1, which equates to true.
Okay.
Because there's a constant in here that says true, which is -1.
Gotcha. Player code, there we go. Okay, so if player is on platform, it is equal false, then set landed to true. So that's again where I should have named that something different, because it's confusing. Because this is actually when it's in the air, right? When it's in the air, we're setting landed to true. You're going to have to explain it. I might have to rename this value for it to make sense. But I spawn dust which by default is, I forget, either the left one or the right one. So I basically have one coming out the left side near his left foot and one coming out near his right foot.
So I'm assuming the default direction is left for dust.
Right.
And then with the second one, you're saying, override the default direction and make it look and move to the right. You probably don't need look, just moving right should be enough.
Okay. Even though there is an animation, because I ran into that issue with the enemy that turns. After they turned and they were moving the right direction, they were still facing the wrong way. And then when I made look right and move right, when I triggered both, then it faced the right way when it turned as well.
Oh, okay. Oh, possibly. Yeah.
Because remember, it's got a specific animation
the exact
to make
behavior might depend on the movement type. But, yeah, what you've done should be safe.
Oh, you know what?
Sure.
That's the other issue, too, is I got rid of the movement. It used to have movement to make it move left or right, but now it does not. It's built into the animation,
it's just
which is
in the
looking
direction.
left or right. So I don't need this at all. I just
enough.
need this. Yep. Exactly. So let me delete that line. So yeah, I caused confusion by naming this the opposite of what it should be landed, I think. That is a question.
So you could just name it like in air.
Exactly. That's what I was going to do. In air.
And then it's just, 3 places that you need to change it. Exactly. And it's told you all of them where there's an error.
Yeah, that's definitely good. Set variable. Oops. In air. I have to click here. Okay. In air. I have to get better with this interface. If I click here, can I just type? No, I guess not. In air. You know what I mean? Like, just type in here. Oh, wait. Yeah, would be nice if I could just type in here or trigger a drop down.
Oh, I see. As a combo box.
Yeah, exactly. Just like this, basically, behaviorally.
Yep. I think the reason why it isn't a combo box is because it's not something where you can, because it's not an expression. You have to choose an exact value. Right. Whereas an expression you can do, in expressions you can sort of type in things like because you might want to say
plus minus.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
but it probably makes I guess in future it could look at having something where you start typing it in and it might like auto or do an IntelliSense thing where it suggests that if you push tab it will fill it out to being what it likely is.
Yeah, like those kind of things are just, it's called quality of life, or just these little tiny things that, like if you're working on a whole game, which is going to take you months or years, every split second you save adds up to a ton over the time of as Eric well knows, as a, I think that's your profession is programming, right? So, yeah, like shortcut keys and little things that save you a split second here or there really add up. But anyway, so now it makes a hell of a lot more sense. It's a lot easier to follow. So, so do you want to walk through it? And I'll just point with my mouse. Do you want to explain it?
Yeah, okay. So the first line, we're just checking that we're in the midair. The second one is, okay, if we're in midair, then record our variable, we set that to true, say we are in the air. Then our third line was where things get a little bit tricky, is where we've said else if. So what we're saying is if that previous condition is not correct, so if we are on the platform, if we're either on solid ground or flat ground or on a slope, then our second check is to say, well, is our in-air variable set to true? So that would mean that on the previous frame we were in midair, but we're not anymore. So the first thing we do is we set our variable back to false, so that basically cancels it. So it doesn't. If we didn't do that, then it would just constantly be spawning dust every frame. So we set false to cancel the dust spawning. Oh, sorry, cancel future dust spawning,
Yep.
Then it spawns 2 dusts.
Right.
The dust, as we discussed before, the dust by default is looking to the left.
Yep.
The second one, we manually override that, say look to the right. So that way we have dust moving in different direction for both of the characters' feet.
Right, exactly. And then now that I know, thanks to Erik, the information Erik provided, I can potentially reduce the sampling frequency of some, or if not all of the sounds I already have in there, to make room for more sounds. And especially if the change frequency feature will be added to Scorpion Engine, I'll be excited to be able to add a little sound effect for when you land on the ground. That'll be a nice little addition. It's always good to have nice audio feedback as well as visual for what's going on in the game when possible. So I'll just add that somewhere in here as well, while we're spawning the dust. But awesome. So I guess we'll wrap up the video, this recording session here, and then the next time we get back into the project, I have stuff ready for the HUD. So it would be great to start making it so, for example, the enemies can hurt the player and we can affect the hit points. And also, I've got those collectibles now that you get from breaking the pots open. And I created a number font so we can make that increment when you collect those. All right. Awesome. Well, thanks as always, Erik, for not only this session and for educating us on how to use this awesome tool, but also for making Scorpion Engine in the first place. It is really, it's been something amazing for a long time, but it just keeps getting ever more useful and amazing. So thanks as always.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for taking the time to learn Scorpion Engine and using it to create a new cool looking game.
Yeah, very happy to. I've been an Amigan my whole life, and it's always been a dream to be able to make games like this and show what classic Amiga was capable of, and eventually AGA. It's very cool. Scorpion has some really nice AGA support as well. So it's absolutely a pleasure, and it's so cool. There's really a renaissance that's been going on for the last few years in the Amiga community and Amiga game development, and it's so cool to be kind of riding that wave and working with people like yourself and Alex Brown and everyone else who's either making their own independent games or in the case of you, making this amazing thing that empowers so many other people to make the Amiga game of their dreams. Very, very cool stuff. I will stop recording there. Thanks everyone for watching.